Good afternoon and welcome to Global Justice Reports, our series of Monday talks on topics that are of current interest. And today we're pleased to have Joe Belden speaking on Manifest Destiny and U.S. expansion with some updates regarding Trump. And my name is Gregory Diamant. I'm your moderator for today. And before we begin, I'd just like to remind you that we depend on your support and your financial support. So there is, for those of you who are here in person, there is a basket in the back. And if at some point you can leave some pecunia mundi in that basket, we'd all appreciate it. And those of you who are watching online, when you go to our website, there is a donate button. And please feel free to donate whatever you can. It is most appreciated by our staff here in San Miguel. So I don't want to say too much about this. I'm sure you all know, but Manifest Destiny, the 19th century ideological whatever that of the United States, that promoted westward expansion, which did great damage to Native Americans and to the buffalo and to the land and so forth, is something that is going to be explored by Joe and with updates about expansion that's going on today. A few words about Joe Belden. He's a Washington, D.C. based writer and lecturer. He has taught courses and lectured at American University's OLLI program, here at the Biblioteca Publica and the Allende Institute, and other venues. And topics have included how Trump won the rural vote. Can Trump win again? Oops, sorry. Just lost my notes. There we go. And the roles of nonprofits from 1989 to 2015. He was also Deputy Executive Director of the Housing Assistance Council in Washington, D.C., which is a national nonprofit. He also worked at USDA on Capitol Hill and for several D.C.-based think tanks. He is the principal author of Housing in Rural America, Building Affordable and Inclusive Communities, published by Sage in 98 and 2019, and Dirt Rich, Dirt Poor, America's Food and Farm Crisis, Rutledge, 1986. So without further ado, here's Joe Belden.
Okay, well, thank you, Gregory. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in for all of this. I'm going to talk for a while, and then we'll entertain questions, comments, etc. As Gregory is saying, and I'm sure you know, Manifest Destiny, the idea was the phrase came along in the 19th century, mid-19th century, led to the U.S.-Mexican War, things like that. But it was the idea that the United States, the then fairly young United States, was destined or even divinely ordained to spread all the way across the continent to the Pacific Ocean, and even beyond, as we will discuss. But this talk is a shortened version of something on this same topic that I've done at the Allende Institute Lifelong Learning Program about a year ago, and also done it with a colleague here in DC several times, doing it again starting in a couple of weeks in an eight session version. But just to start into this, the word manifest, of course, means something that's obvious, not subject to misinterpretation or more than one interpretation. Number of synonyms there. I won't read all this to you, bore you to death, but it's out there. Destiny then, of course, implies something foreordained, kind of suggesting a greater noble or course or end For example, the country's destiny to be a model of liberty to the world. But um, something that's interesting has come along just in the last few months that I've discovered is there's um, some new definitions out there, and I'll get to Donald Trump in a minute. Of course, he is um, driving us all a bit batty with his new ideas just in the last few weeks about spreading the United States elsewhere. And I'll come to that in just a second. But I discovered actually just in the last few months that there are two or three rock bands with the name Manifest Destiny. Um, I'm not sure they're still very active, but one was founded in Southern California in the 80s, another in Oklahoma, and apparently there's one in Europe. There's also, in your spare time, uh, go on the internet and put in the phrase "how to manifest," and the word "manifest" has become, um, or it's associated with a pop psychology movement of kind of the power of positive thinking. It's quite bizarre, actually, that there are quite a few people that kind of sell themselves as modern day gurus, and that manifesting is a way to achieve something in life, money, relationship, career, whatever. It's quite odd, but it's something very different kind of use of the word manifest. Anyway, the this is things like the U.S.-Mexican War, what we did to the Indian population, what we did, how we acquired Hawaii. There are things that people in the United States don't really know a lot about, compared to, say, the Civil War, the World War I and II. The U.S.-Mexican War, for example, is a kind of our forgotten war. And I think an example of that, you probably remember the movie The Killers of the Flower Moon from a couple of years ago, which is kind of an example of the way white people, actually with murder, acquired Indian property. I think it was set in Oklahoma. And what I did a year and a half ago is look at movie box office returns in 2023 for the year. You can see there the the uh, highest selling, highest grossing movies were Barbie and the Super Mario Brothers movie. Oppenheimer, I think, was actually a pretty interesting. I thought Barbie was a pretty interesting movie and a good message. Guardians of the Galaxy, Killers of the Flower Moon was way down the list in terms of its gross box office, showing that I think, unfortunately, people just aren't very interested in this kind of an issue. But this is an interesting quote from about a year and a half ago. Congressman Kevin McCarthy, former House Speaker, he's a fourth generation Californian, so he ought to know better about than this. But he said in the speech that in every single war that the U.S. has ever fought, we never asked for any land afterwards other than for American military cemeteries. And there are those cemeteries around various places, some in Europe and other places. But the U.S.-Mexican War is something where we definitely asked for land afterwards, taking half of Mexico, and we'll get to that. So it's just an example of, frankly, ignorance of this kind of issue. It's kind of sad, but anyway, there's interesting art about Manifest Destiny. This is a pretty famous picture that's painted actually inside the U.S. Capitol, in one of the stairways, by a German artist named Emanuel Leutze. It's quite a huge thing, and you can see the pioneers there pointing the way west as they cross the mountains. And actually have a Smithsonian curator talking about it, but I don't think we have time to look at that. But I should say, if you're interested in this topic and looking at it further, a couple of books that I would strongly recommend, actually three. One of them you're probably familiar with is Forget the Alamo. And I think the Global Justice had one of the authors of Forget the Alamo a year or two ago, of their book. I'm a Texan myself. And if you grew up in Texas, maybe some of you get sort of marinated in chicken fried in the myth of the Alamo, the heroic Anglo myth. So that's quite an interesting book that relates to some of this. But one that's very two books I would highly recommend, both by Amy Greenberg, who's chair of the history department at Penn State, and one of them actually you can see here. I'm going to hold it up. This next painting is on the cover of her book. And this little book is a reader of original documents in Manifest Destiny, starting in the 17th century and going up to the beginning of the 20th century. Um, and this book is designed apparently for a graduate or upper level undergraduate course on Manifest Destiny. It's called Manifest Destiny: American Territorial Expansion: A Brief History with Documents. Amy Greenberg is also the author of this book. It's called A Wicked War. Um, um, Polk, Clay, Lincoln, and the 1846 U.S. invasion of Mexico. And it is, I think, a really interesting book about the U.S.-Mexican War. It's not really a military history. It's more a political and social history with a lot of biographical sketches, vignettes of people like James K. Polk, who we'll talk about later, the president, Henry Clay, Abraham Lincoln, who was a very young congressman during the U.S.-Mexican War, et cetera. Anyway, this picture was painted by a man born in Germany whose family came to the United States in the mid 19th century. Um, his uncle and father established a lithographic company, did quite well with this. But this picture was actually commissioned by a promoter of travel to the West for his Western travel guide, which you can see here. Lady Liberty is kind of floating across the land. On the far right side, you can see New York City and the Atlantic Ocean and light. On the far west, you see darkness. You see wagon trains and the railroad and miners and farmers and settlers surging from east to west, pushing forward. The native people, the Indians, are fleeing, the buffalo are fleeing, the wildlife are fleeing. Um, and it's quite, she is carrying a school book. She's stringing telegraph or electric wire behind her. So this painting has become frequently used in studies of this thing. And it was actually a travel promotion kind of picture. It looks like a gigantic mural. The original is actually 11 by 17 inches. And it was recently in the Smithsonian Institution for a while, but now it's gone back to the Autry Museum of the American West in California. But I won't go into more of that, but it's an interesting symbolism of what's going on. And this is the guy, George Crofut. I won't read all this to you, but I'm glad to share this whole PowerPoint with Global Justice if you guys want to keep it. But Crofut, the sponsor of this and the publisher of this travel guide, has this long description of the Indians, the savages, are fleeing. The Star of Liberty is too much for them, and this travel, this settlement, moving from east to west, is going to cause the mighty wilderness to blossom like the rose. He also produced the picture as a poster, and he would sell it again in the late 19th century for people to have in their homes. Anyway, interesting. I have a number of maps in here, and this is kind of indicative of the settlement on the right was the United States in the late 18th century. After the United States became the U.S., the original 13 colonies and some more added there in this movement west. At that time, of course, it was French and Spanish, the rest of the country, including Florida. There were a lot of big events that happened in this whole movement across the 19th century. And of course, it was really earlier than the 19th century, starting with the first European settlers and of course the Spanish, and much earlier, taking over all of South America, Central America, uh, current day Mexico, and suppressing and frankly engaging in a genocide against the Indians in all of that territory. But there were a lot of big events that are probably very familiar. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the Indian land cessions and removal and pressure against the Native Americans that went on for hundreds of years. Um, then other big events were when Texas became a state, became an independent country for a little while, in rebellion against Mexico. Then Texas became a state finally in 1845, and that instigated the war with Mexico in 1846 to 48, and loss of half of its territory for Mexico. Then other things happening later in the 19th century, uh, our acquisition of Alaska, acquisition of Hawaii, which most of us really don't much about how we acquired Hawaii. It was in some ways worse than what we did in Mexico. But there are also lots of smaller events going on. The War of 1812 was part of it. During the War of 1812, there was some sentiment for actually trying to annex Canada. So I don't know, maybe Donald Trump has studied this. I don't know. um, the Monroe Doctrine was kind of a subset of Manifest Destiny. The U.S. annexed Florida, or got Spain to give it up in 1819. And then a very interesting um, part of this was that in the 1850s, um, there were a number of kind of independent military adventurers who tried to take over countries in Central America. And they were known as filibusters. We think of the word filibuster today, meaning um, a legislative strategy to delay things, or more generally, if someone is said to be filibustering, they're just arguing endlessly against some point of view. But those are some smaller events. And then, of course, today, we've got Donald Trump just in the last few weeks talking about taking over Greenland, reclaiming the Panama Canal. Would he want to invade Mexico to try to send our military troops there to try to control drugs? Um, is he really serious about trying to invite or pressure Canada to become the 51st state? It's just sort of bizarre. Um, this is a funny cartoon that I found a couple of weeks ago. Trump with his shopping list, and of course, this was before he started talking just much more recently about taking over Gaza. That Gaza should become a new Riviera, and all the Palestinians should just move somewhere else. And he actually has used the phrase, as I'm sure you know, very recently, an ownership position um, in Gaza. So this is something he said just very recently in January about Greenland. I think Greenland is going to be worked out. He doesn't really understand what claim Denmark has to Greenland, but it would be a very unfriendly act if they don't allow the U.S. to take over Greenland. That's for protection of the free world. So it's just wow. Some of this stuff, if 5 years ago or 10 years ago you'd written it up as a satirical skit for Saturday Night Live, it would have been kind of clever but unbelievable. And then you may have heard just in the last few days, a congressman, I think it was the end of last week, a congressman from Georgia has introduced a bill in the House of Representatives to rename Greenland as Red, White, and Blue Land. I hope you've all heard about this. It's just kind of wacky. And I've looked up the actual language of this bill. And it seems the language of his bill seems to say that he is suggesting, as with, say, the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, that the United States should just start calling Greenland red, white, and blue land, whether we acquire it or not. But the first part of his bill says the president is authorized to enter negotiations with Denmark to purchase or otherwise acquire Greenland. And it says other acquisition. So that's very interesting. What does that mean? That we should invade, military action against Greenland and just kind of take it over? And that's kind of very interesting because, frankly, that's a lot of what we did with Mexico in 1846 to 48. So I just think this, this bill is probably not going to go anywhere, but who knows? And as with the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico, which I think is frankly just nuts, um, could the Congress actually pass a bill which Trump would certainly sign to change all of our official maps of the United States to red, white, and blue land? That just seems kind of comic. Anyway, okay. I wish I had more about Trump, but he's changing and developing every day, and who knows what's coming next. It's made our course that we're teaching here in DC, starting in a couple of weeks, difficult because we have to keep having to revise things, on a weekly or almost daily basis. But this is what U.S. looked like in late 18th, early 19th century, before Louisiana Purchase. So much of this land was actually Spanish, as I'm sure you know. The phrase manifest destiny actually was first coined by a journalist named John O'Sullivan, or it actually may have been a woman that worked for him or with him named Jane McManus Storm. She may have actually written it. Be shocked, I know, to hear that a woman did the work and a man got the credit. But he was writing in this magazine in 1845, talking about the looming conflict with Mexico, but also conflict with Britain over the Oregon Territory, which almost developed into hostilities also. But he was saying it's really the fulfillment of our United States destiny to overspread the continent, allotted by Providence. And this religious theme kept recurring in a lot of the discussions and thought about manifest destiny, that we were ordained by God to be able to do this spreading across the country, across the continent. He wrote later in 1845 using the phrase again, manifest destiny, and that's kind of where it came from, not used before. Is this one of the most important themes in U.S. history? And it's now come back, so maybe it is. There are a lot of definitions. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. You may remember, I still have my undergraduate copy of a book written in the 60s called Manifest Destiny and Mission by Frederick and Lois Merck. Frederick Merck was a Harvard professor. Lois Merck was his wife. They probably did a lot of the work. And he had this religious theme to it, and also that manifest destiny, or the seizure of native lands or Mexico, whatever, would allow these neighboring peoples to improve themselves, to gain admission to the American Union. But there are other kinds of definitions, though. This is a long one from Wikipedia that I won't go into. William Weeks was an early 20th century historian, who said that the United States had a unique moral virtue, and then again, manifest destiny was this divinely ordained thing. There's one from Britannica. This is a very different one. The Smithsonian Museum of American History here in DC has a Latino history exhibit. This is quite a different definition, saying manifest destiny was a belief that white Protestant Anglo-Americans were racially and culturally superior to Native American people, certainly to Mexicans, and this kind of fed this expansionist drive to the West, leading to the Mexican-American War. Anyway, um, my I think the best definition that I have seen is actually from Amy Greenberg's reader on the documents. That, and I won't read all of this, but uh, she says that Manifest Destiny, posed Western expansion as natural and predetermined and legitimated this brutal racially based warfare against both Indians and Mexicans. Many um, uh, citizens of the United States came to believe that Manifest Destiny was divinely ordained, um, and empowered the U.S. to grow and spread across the continent. Excuse me. Um, and there was opposition to this expansionist idea, but by the 1840s, a majority of Americans seemed to agree with it, and this led to war in 1846. Anyway, um, this is a really good map because this is a map from the early 20th century, but it shows the different pieces of our acquisition of all of this country all across the continent, and it shows when the dates of the certain things happening. United States in 1783, the end of the Revolution. Louisiana purchased in 1803. Uh, Texas was annexed and became a state in 1845, which excuse me, infuriated the Mexicans, who never recognized Texas having broken away from Mexico. Um, the end of the war, the Mexican War, the so-called Mexican Cession in 1848, excuse me, um, brought all this further territory in. Um, Kevin McCarthy apparently doesn't know anything about it, but California, all of California used to be Mexico. And then the Oregon country, um, there was argument with Britain, and President Polk at that time decided not to have a two-front war. He wanted a war with Mexico, but he compromised with Britain, and the British got British Columbia, and the U.S. got Oregon and Washington and some of Idaho there. So, um, key events: 1803, the Louisiana Purchase, of course. Um, Let's think of uh, a fun trick question asked people in the United States is, what is Mexican Independence Day? And a lot of people will say, well, Cinco de Mayo, it must be right. Well, of course, that's wrong. Um, as those of us who live in San Miguel know, it was in 1810. Um, Another big event, the United States gains Florida from Spain with a treaty in 1819. Mexico then won its independence in 1821. Mexico becomes a country. Um, Then in the 1820s, as I'm sure you know, the Anglo settlement of the Mexican province of Tejas began to pick up with Anglos coming and bringing their slaves. Um, Mexicans wanted more settlement, got more than they bargained for. Mexico then outlawed slavery, which was uh, the probably the most important factor in the Texians and some Tejanos wanting to separate themselves from Mexico, and leading to the Texas Revolution of 1835, 1836 against Mexico. Um, Another thing that we don't know a whole lot about in the U.S. was Andrew Jackson in 1830 got through Congress an Indian Removal Act, which was particularly aimed at Indians in the United States Southeast, and forced them further west. I mean, ending up in Oklahoma, current day Oklahoma, and that was largely at the behest of the white landowners, planters who wanted the Indian land in the Southeast to grow their slavery-based cotton. 1836, the Texians, as I was saying, the Texians and some Tejanos want independence from Mexico. A key factor was when James K. Polk was elected president in 1844. He was kind of a dark horse candidate. It was kind of an upset that he got elected president. He was actually a protege of Andrew Jackson. He had been Speaker of the House of Representatives, and then he was elected governor of Tennessee. Um, he ran for re-election as governor for Tennessee in the early 1840s, and he was defeated twice for re-election. So you wouldn't think that his political career was going very far, but he got the nomination as kind of a compromise candidate for the Democratic Party in 1844, and defeated Henry Clay, the Whig candidate. Clay actually ran for president 3 times, um, and lost every time. And Clay was very opposed to expansion and to the U.S.-Mexican War. Other events after Polk was elected, he finished the annexation of Texas in the very last few days of 1845. Texas became a state. Texas, you probably know, had been an independent nation, republic from 1836 to 1845. The U.S.-Mexican War then kicked off in April of 1846. It was pretty much over by the fall of 1847. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in early 1848, and Mexico lost more than half its territory. Quite shocking and amazing. And a lot of people don't know about it, including Kevin McCarthy. There's another interesting book, fairly recent book, massive, called Continental Reckoning, by an academic, and he poses something that he calls the great coincidence, and that is that in early 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, by which Mexico lost 53% of its territory. And less than 2 weeks later, gold was discovered in California, leading to the massive kind of gold rush across the country. So this particular academic um, uh, person, Professor West, says this is kind of an amazing coincidence of these two massive events. Anyway, other events continuing: Mormon immigration, the California gold rush begins, as I was saying. The U.S. bought from Mexico in 1853 a smaller plot of land across, we'll see it on a map in a minute, across the bottom of Arizona and New Mexico, allowing the building of transcontinental railroad, the Gadsden Purchase. Also not a very well-known thing that happened. Again, I mentioned the filibusters. That's something that was going on mainly in the 1850s. A man named Lopez invaded Cuba several times. William Walker was a very interesting person who was both a lawyer and a physician, Princeton graduate, smart guy, Southerner. He organized a number of private expeditions into Mexico and Central America. He actually briefly set up something that he called the Republic of Sonora, where he invaded the Mexican northern state of Sonora and also Baja California. The United States government never really supported him. He finally got executed in Honduras when he tried one too many times. But for a while, he actually set himself up as the ruler of Nicaragua for about a year in the 1850s. He was a very odd character. But the original word use of the word filibuster, and referring to both these expeditions and these people, these men were called filibusters for their activities. Other events going on: 1867, Seward's Folly. We got Alaska from Russia. Indian wars and the suppression and and pressure on Indian peoples, tribal people, moving them further west, all constantly. And then in the late 19th century, Manifest Destiny was kind of reborn. Um, Trump is obviously it's quite bizarre, I think, if you ask the average citizen of the U.S. and some Europeans who you think is the best United States president, and some people might say nobody, but a lot of people would say Lincoln. People might say FDR. Some people traditionally might say Washington or Jefferson. Not many people are going to say William McKinley, but apparently William McKinley in the late 19th century is now Donald Trump's favorite um, U.S. president because of his terrorists and because of his expansionism. Uh, excuse me. And McKinley oversaw, the Spanish-American War and acquisition of these Pacific territories, and then Hawaii. Frankly, I was not all that aware myself of how we acquired Hawaii. Um, and some of you may know this, some of you may not. Hawaii was actually an independent country, a monarchy, from about 1795 until 1898. Um, it was the original settlers of the Hawaiian Islands were from about the year 1000 CE, coming from Polynesia by sea. Um, they were kind of separate islands for a while. Then they were united into one country, a monarchy. But with a legislature, it became a kind of a monarchical republic with an advisory legislature in the early 19th century. Um, in in 1883, um, the then king was kind of forced by white sugar growers and others who had started settling in Hawaii in the early mid 19th century, and they kind of forced the then king to accept a new constitution, which came in as the Bayonet Constitution, acquired at the point of a bayonet, um, which removed a lot of the powers of the king and gave a lot more representation and voting power and power to the white um, missionary, the descendants of the white missionaries and the white sugar growers in Hawaii. And then finally in um, in 1898, the then queen, who had become queen when the king died, her name was Liliuokalani. She was simply forced by the white power brokers in Hawaii to just abdicate, and Hawaii became an American territory, and then of course it became a state finally in 1959. Um, so what I like to say, and it's pretty obvious, is the United States stole half of Mexico, but all of Hawaii. And I think most of us don't know that. Kevin McCarthy probably has no idea. I wonder if Donald Trump does. This is another, and this is a poster, a picture I took in the Ellis Island National Park Museum in New York, about annexation. It's the claiming of new territories through war, treaty, or purchase. Um, the United States expanded by annexing areas that once belonged to other nations, and they mention Hawaii, but Native Americans, France, Spain, Russia, Mexico, Hawaii. But okay, this is another. I have a number of maps. This is a map going back to the time of the Louisiana Purchase. You see the red line there was the Lewis and Clark expedition. But of course, at that time, um, Oregon country was still claimed by both Britain and the U.S. and by Spain. And then, of course, um, at this time, early in the 19th century, so much of the area was actually still Spanish, later to become Mexico. This is just another simpler map showing that at about this time, say after the Louisiana Purchase, say about 1810, but before Florida became part of the U.S. in 1819, and before Spanish territory became Mexico. Um, another a simple map. But this is one of my favorite maps. This map is from the early 20th century, but the advantage to this one, I think, is it delineates the different pieces of our expansion, but has a date for each of those. Say Texas in 1845, the Mexican Cession in 1848. You see the Gadsden Purchase down there, the one I was talking about, buying from Mexico in 1853, this extra chunk of land. But it also has uh, an outline there for every U.S. state with a date of when that a particular state became a state, part of the U.S. So I think it's just a very interesting illustrative map. It doesn't have Hawaii on there, Virgin Islands, etc. But anyway, um, so these pieces, I don't need to go through this, but the various pieces that we moved across mainly in the 19th century, but it actually began much earlier, with the first British settlers, for example, in the early 17th century, always pressuring the tribal people to move further west. Indian land seizure from the beginning went on and on. So the National Portrait Gallery here in Washington a couple of years ago had a very interesting exhibit. I won't read all of this, but it was about the 1898 Spanish-American War and this rebirth of Manifest Destiny, particularly under McKinley and under Theodore Roosevelt, pushing further and further west. And then we acquired, for a while, the United States actually controlled the Philippines for a number of decades. And we also ended up with the Pacific territories like Puerto Rico and so forth. Anyway, this is a very interesting exhibit. I think on the National Portrait Gallery in the Smithsonian, you can still find a lot about this exhibit, if you search online. All right, well, let me stop blathering here. This is a cute little video for a couple of minutes. If you remember the movie Night at the Museum, remember that one from several years ago? The characters in the exhibits in the museum kind of came alive at night. Well, this is a little video of Ben Stiller, the museum custodian, getting an argument with some of the little figures in these dioramas. And if I can make this work, then I'll end with that and take your questions and comments. Let me see if this will work.
My kids can't hide anything from me. I'm home. Especially when they've been using toilet paper that doesn't hold up.
All right.
Show me.
Okay. Everybody see it?
We aren't seeing it.
What's going on over here?
You need to press on the
Do
share
not see
green
it.
arrow. Joe,
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey, Jed, stop that. All right? No, don't do that. You blow a hole in your mountain, all you're going to hit is a wall. Besides, Gigantor, we got us a railroad to build. We're blowing a hole in that thing. Okay, first of all, enough with the Gigantor giant stuff, okay? I'm just trying to close up shop. We're going to blow it anyway. Yeah, poof. Wow. What are you doing? What's it look like you're doing? It's manifest destiny. You can't fight it, neither can I. Go, we're down to my. Okay. Listen, Octavus, you got to stop that.
It's Octavius, Mary.
Okay, you know what? Fine, great. Here you go. What happens?
You cannot do this. I am a Roman general.
Right.
I have right.
You know, okay.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, where we are here. Well, I hope you can all hear that. Okay. Well, that's what I had. There are other interesting videos. One thing you can discover is that high school teachers sometimes have made little rap videos rap music presentations to explain Manifest Destiny and lots of other things to their high school students. Okay, well, I will stop now. I'm glad to entertain your questions, comments.
Thank you very much, Joe. And we'll see now if we've got some people here who would like to have questions or comments for Joe. And anybody here or online? Oh, there's one gentleman over here.
Yes, you mentioned McKinley. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes,
Okay, you mentioned McKinley. And McKinley was opposed by one of my favorite politicians who doesn't seem to get any respect at all, and that's William Jennings Bryan.
yes, yes, right.
And he spoke eloquently, as he always did, about the evil of American imperialism
Yeah,
and Manifest Destiny specifically.
yeah.
And I wonder why he doesn't get more credit than, well, he doesn't get any credit at all. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
No, that's a very, very, very good point. I mean, Brian was a fascinating character. Um, and yeah, of course, ran for president 2 or 3 times, right? Um,
3 times.
yeah, 3 times. Um, no, it's too bad. Um, I don't know how to explain it. I'm not really a student of McKinley. Apparently Donald Trump is, but which is, I think it's kind of, as I was saying, quite odd that McKinley seems to be Trump's favorite president over his tariff issues and over over the expansion. But yeah, McKinley was right, I think. Yeah, yeah. And so
McKinley was right? Or do you
no,
mean
no, I'm
Donald?
sorry. Brian was right. No, Brian, I'm sorry, Brian. Yeah, yeah, I didn't mean to say that. Yeah. No, McKinley was something. Yeah. Yeah.
I happen to have some of his speeches, parts of his speeches, and I wonder if you'd be interested in hearing what he had to say, what Brian had to say about Manifest Destiny.
Sure. Yeah, it's not too long, but go ahead for other people.
Well, it's just a couple sentences, actually. Well, pardon?
I'm sorry, what? Yeah,
Okay, I guess people would like to hear it. I think
that's
it's
fine, sure.
genuine. Okay, thank you. This is from one of his speeches that he made. I believe it was in 1900. And he's asked about what the problems of the United States are as he sees them. And he says, as I have said many times, the greatest problem of this nation in the past, in the present, and sadly 100 years into the future is an insidious evil. I speak of the evil of imperialism. Imperialist politicians must be held responsible for all the consequent loss of American life. If the United States or any imperialist power invades and occupies other nations, be it the Philippines, the countries of Asia, or the Middle East, the subject peoples will fight and resist. For God placed in every human heart the love of liberty. He never made a race of people so low in the scale of civilization or intelligence that it would welcome a foreign master. And there's more, but I'll wait.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat regrettable that populism today has become a dirty word um, amongst progressives or amongst many of us, both in the U.S. and of course in Europe. And as I'm sure you know, the original populism in the 19th century was a farmer labor alliance that kind of didn't survive very well and also became kind of racist, unfortunately. Um, anyway, but other comments, questions, but whatever you guys.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
For your perspective.
Jurgen, yeah.
I want to ask, have we not learned anything from lessons? What are lessons learned, and what's your perspective on lessons learned from more current imperialistic actions by countries? So Great Britain into, was I not on? Okay. Great Britain's efforts in India, Holland's action down in South Africa, ours certainly, but do you see the tendency now, or the lesson learned being that, is it really wise to do this from an economic point, and is the current administration just going down a path that is just so short-sighted? So your comments.
Well, absolutely. I mean, is Trump inspired by Putin, for example? And of course, the incidence of a stronger country or nation trying to seize territory from a weaker nation is not something that's new. It didn't start in the 19th century. Go back hundreds or thousands of years even. But yeah, it doesn't look like it's just sort of bizarre, really, to me that Trump thinks that it should be obvious that we should own Greenland, or that he and you have to wonder, is he really serious about Canada? There was a humorous column I just read today that the hockey star Wayne Gretzky becomes president of the U.S. in a new Canadian alliance with the U.S., or Canada has become part of the U.S. and Wayne Gretzky becomes president of the U.S. So it's sort of silly, but who knows? You know, it's just nuts. But anyway, yeah, I don't. Doesn't look like we've learned a lot. Yes, sir. Jurgen, I think you need to unmute yourself, Jurgen. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself, and I hope I can be heard. My voice is a little bit hoarse. But what struck me in your presentation is the blatant arrogance that ran through the U.S. mindset, and the very words "manifest destiny" having their origin in religious misconception. Unfortunately, I happen to be a Presbyterian ordained minister, and the whole concept of predestination is today greatly misunderstood, and by the great majority of people. I don't personally believe in predestination. That's not my point. But my point is that the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again, is exploited by people like Steve Bannon, who is brilliant in his strategy to go deep within this sense of superiority and arrogance of WASP mentality, of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant mentality. And to be frank, I don't know how this could be countered. I mean, Trump is not the thinker. Trump is only the spokesperson for the people who dig deep into the ignorance of the Christian movement, of the Christian church. So it's really complex. When you think about it, this arrogance about Greenland and Canada and Panama is simply a continuation of as you basically said, your manifest destinies that happened throughout the 19th century and earlier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you have to wonder where Trump is getting this. Is he getting it from Bannon? I don't think Trump has read a lot of books on all of this. He didn't read anything. And somebody is feeding him these ideas. It could certainly be Bannon or someone like it. And in terms of the religious origins of it, as you're probably very familiar with the City on a Hill speech, John Winthrop in 1630, coming over with the Puritans, pilgrims on the ship and making his speech of "We shall be as a city upon a hill." the eyes of all people. And that was a religious speech, you know, and they saw themselves, the original New England settlers from Britain saw themselves as, you know, divinely guided and inspired. And it's that the City on the Hill speech is the second document in Amy Greenberg's book of about 40 or 50 documents all the way to the end of the 19th century. But she starts, you know, in the early 17th century about how reasonably inspired, unfortunately. Yeah.
Of course, that speech, the City on a Hill, is based on the Jewish concept of chosen people. I mean, it goes way back. And
Right.
the concept of chosen people means in no way that they are above any other people. I mean, theologically, it doesn't make any sense. The chosen people were meant to be examples of love and of inclusiveness rather than enmity. And so theologically, the church has totally failed. Not necessarily all mainline, but the Catholic and the evangelical movement, but also the mainland Protestant churches have failed to really teach what the history of the Bible and its influence in U.S. blah 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 has been, and that actually disgusts me. Again, as a teacher, I used to be an academic teaching theology, but people like Bannon, I think, really know how to exploit that.
Oh, absolutely.
To the highest.
Absolutely.
It's very distressing.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your comment. I'd like to make a comment.
Yes,
if
sir.
I may, and talk about Greenland and Canada. One thing that is going on is whatever Trump says and many of the people around him about not believing in climate change, it's a hoax, and so forth. Those are words that they're saying, but not what they believe and basing their strategy on. And one of the things is that we see the Arctic melting, and passages for ships are going to be much easier going through the Arctic for transporting goods, but also for mining. And what we see is that in Greenland, as an example, is you're having a lot of melting and exposing of very bad things, but also of potential mineral wealth. On a sidebar, we know that over the past week, as far as the Ukraine goes, one of the reasons that Trump wants to negotiate with Russia for a peace deal in Ukraine is that he has sent people there, an ambassador and Rubio and so forth, to negotiate for rare earths that are in Ukraine. So one has to look at all of those things and not just laugh in talking about Canada or Greenland. Now, Greenland being part of Denmark, and Denmark is a NATO country, as long as the United States, and there's a codicil in the NATO treaty that an attack on one NATO country is an attack on all. And should the United States decide to militarily try to take over Greenland, and I'm not saying they're going to, but people have talked about that, and certainly in the quote in that representatives take it over by any means necessary, more or less. That's one of them. It'll be an interesting conundrum for a very weak Europe to have to deal with that situation. But I think what is going environmentally and the exposure of more areas for trade, sea passage, and mining is something that we need to keep in our minds when we look at these topics.
No, absolutely. And it in some ways is both comic and very serious. But yeah, maybe they're assuming that the Greenland ice cap is disappearing, and we can turn it into hotels and golf courses, you know. But then even crazier, I think, is this idea of United States, taking, as he says, some ownership position of Gaza and moving all the Palestinians out. And wow, that's just that's both comic and serious and terrifying.
He knows.
Yeah, yeah, yes,
Joe,
yes.
first, thank you for your presentation, not to mention other parts of your writing, etc. I want to pick up on the point that Jürgen made about the religious basis, the ordained part of Manifest Destiny.
Yeah.
So during the time that, let's just focus on the earlier phases of Manifest Destiny, were there religious groups that were speaking out against that use of God to legitimate things and maybe just against
Sure.
the hostile action?
Sure.
Did any of your writings depict those groups and what they were saying and doing?
Well, yes. Actually, the in the run up to the U.S.-Mexican War, and I learned from Amy Greenberg, by the way, to please say U.S.-Mexican War and not Mexican War or Mexican-American War, because Mexican-American War, she claims, sort of supposes that Mexico invaded the U.S. and actually, the U.S. went down and goaded the Mexicans into conflict. But for example, in the run up to that war, there were abolitionist ministers in New England who were very opposed to expansionism. The Whig Party of that period was pretty much anti-expansionist, although there were Northern Whigs and Southern Whigs, and there were Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats. So obviously the Southerners, the white Southerners, largely wanted this expansion to have new territories for slavery-based cotton production. So that was a lot of it, But yes, there was religious opposition, excuse me, but also religious support.
But that specifically challenged the religious basis of the concept of manifest destiny, or just the actions?
That's a good question. I think it was more the action. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay,
Which generally were much more internal improvements, kind of things. The Democrats of that period were the expansionists. Polk and Jackson obviously were Democrats. McKinley, was a Democrat. But
We have a person here who has a comment.
Before we drift from the religious aspect of things, I've been reading some middle-aged intellectuals from New York, Daniel Pinchbeck, et cetera, and they're looking for new mindsets. They're looking how we can save ourselves from climate change, which is pretty serious. Speaking to an engineer last night, a lot of people are really concerned. And this man who's the preacher too, was Jesus not more of a Buddhist? Like this whole religious, empire. I mean, I'm sure I don't want to offend anyone who believes in God or offend religions. But as I said, there are intellectuals that I've been reading that are looking for new ways to find a way to get through this very, very, it could affect our agriculture and food, or agriculture. So I just wanted to put that out to possibly the minister who's speaking, that there is an empire of church that has it. What has that done? And is Buddhism possibly a monistic idealism, a possible way to go?
Go ahead, Jürgen. Yeah.
Well, you asked the question whether Jesus was a bigot. Let me just say that no, he was not a bigot. If you just look at the Sermon on the Mount, you will know that he is no bigot in Matthew. No, it's unfortunately the history of the church that I blame. Yes, I think the sense of conversion, of converting savages, or that sense of self-importance and superiority is embedded in the church. Unfortunately, I'm a rebel within the church. And by the way, I identify today, since I've been in San Miguel for the last 6.5 years, with the Unitarians. And the Unitarians were the ones who initially were all up in Boston. Jefferson, Adams, Thoreau. These were all Unitarians. They were not, they were, if you look at Jefferson's Bible, you'll see that he scratched out all the offensive part of the Bible and was much more purist in the sense of the historical Jesus. By the way, Albert Schweitzer, who won the Nobel Prize in, I think it was in 1912, became a Unitarian at the end of his life. He was a Lutheran, but he gave up on the church also, for the same reason that I'm close to giving up on the established church.
Yeah.
I've been an academic, I've been a professor for most of my years, but and my students were intrigued by challenging what they had heard and learned, but it was the biblical truth. So no, Jesus was definitely not a bigot, quite the opposite.
My wife and I both grew up
We
in
have
Texas
another
as Southern
person here.
Baptists,
Speak.
but got away from that when we were very young and became Unitarians and raised our kids in Unitarian church because we didn't want them to think of religion as a black box. But I also have, in a collection of political buttons, I still have a political button that I got 50 or 60 years ago that says Jesus was a creeping socialist. So I was like that one, but yeah.
Thank you. We have a person here who'd like to speak also.
There's been several articles on a program or a new, it's not new, but a movement called the New Apostolic Reformation, NAR, and it's a Christian supremacist theological belief.
Really?
And they have their beliefs based on something called the Seven Mountain Mandate. And this is what they plan to take over.
Wow.
Family, religion, education, media, arts, and entertainment, business, and government. And Mike Johnson is right at the heart of it.
Yeah. Okay.
We have another person in the back who would like to speak. Let me get the mic. Oh, thank you.
So I came here to learn about the history. I didn't think we'd be discussing religion. I'm also an ordained United Church of Christ pastor visiting here. And I thought the word destiny was spiritual enough, but it does go quickly to these questions about religion. And I just wanted to put in a good word for, I don't know if you've seen that 17 United States denominations, including mine, and the Presbyterians, and the Unitarians, and the Quakers, led by the Quakers, are suing Trump around the sanctuary, matter, while the Christian nationalists are supporting him. So this divide between faiths, we're not all Christian supremacists. We're not all Christian nationalists. In fact, we're disgusted by what's happening. And this is historically true, as you were saying. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Well, by the way, I think we mentioned Mark Twain. He has a number of interesting articles which are a breath of fresh air that one could read about imperialism and what's going on. And of course, he was writing during the time of the Spanish-American War, the Philippines, and so forth. And a lot of it one can relate to with things that have been going on in the last 30 years.
Can I speak?
Please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, right to the point there. Yes, I was a cradle Catholic, and now I'm an interfaith minister, and it was a long journey to get there. I'm also involved in 12-step spirituality. And what I've come to believe is that, well, it's also other people have come to this. It's pretty obvious in the evidence that the original spirituality of the Christian religion or the Buddhist religion, or all of them, get co-opted by powerful governments and monarchs and stuff like that. I suggest that I don't have time to go into the history or of all that, but there's a really good video online. If you just Google the Sword of Constantine, it talks about how everybody was forced to become Christian and it was militarized and the whole thing. So the big difference is between spirituality and institutional religion. And I go to the Episcopal Church. I support only those where they are openly welcoming to gay people, and they have a progressive social justice thing, and that's church by church, not by denomination. That comes, and just to check that out. Thank you.
Let me mention one other thing maybe about a part that religion played in a secondary conflict that was part of the U.S.-Mexican War, 1846 to 48, and that is, I didn't have time to go into all of this, but there were many, many volunteer regiments that were formed in almost every state that joined a very small standing army and invaded Mexico. And one of them was a New York-based regiment of immigrant Irish persons and Germans, mostly Irish, called the St. Patrick's Battalion. You may have heard about them. They were part of the invading force. They became very alienated in part because they're Catholic. They were all Catholics. Their Catholic religion was scorned and looked down upon by the dominant Protestant Christians in the other part of the army, and they saw themselves as having more in common with the Mexican Catholics, and a large group of them actually deserted and joined the Mexican side and fought for the Mexican side. It didn't go too well for them. They got defeated in a battle, and a bunch of them got executed at the very end of the war. But that was partly a religious conflict over Catholic versus frankly, the racist Southern Protestants. So interesting.
Which is why in Mexico, St. Patrick's Day is celebrated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You should, yeah, you could, there's a great song about the San Patricios. And they are celebrated in Mexico and in Ireland, those people. Yeah. Excuse me.
Well, I think we have reached the end. And Joe, thank you so much. And all the people who participated, thank you for being here. Thank you for being online. And please don't forget to donate so that we can keep these things going, whether online or physically here. And we'll see you with our next production of Global Justice Reports. So have a good afternoon wherever you are. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Yeah.